So probably you've spent all morning listening to keynotes and so on, and you might have some questions. Okay, so we would like to start this conversation with a great question, and you probably have it.
Good afternoon. My name is Alexei. I basically came here for more like a practical approach. And so far I heard scientific talk about quantum computers, cryptography. That is great. But a question specifically for Phil. Can you be more specific on cryptography in enterprise? How can we manage it? How can we, prevent data loss? And for example, if our employee using the same cryptography, we are interested, to have an archive of the conversation, of the files being, sent using cryptography. How can we manage things?
Well, we're seeing enterprises hit by such powerful attackers now that it almost feels hopeless. It's not just how good your crypto is, it's how good everything else is. If your server can be owned, it doesn't matter how good your crypto is. If key material can be exfiltrated from the server by malware that is in control of the server, then having good crypto is not quite enough. We've had this arms race going on for centuries between cryptographers and cryptanalysis. And for the past 40 years, the cryptographers have been ahead. The best cryptography is better than the best cryptanalysis for about 40 years. And that's a comfortable position to be in. We felt very smug about that. Cryptographers feel very comfortable with that kind of superior position, So we get fat, dumb, and happy, But if you look at the rest of the cybersecurity picture, it's terribly lopsided in the opposite direction. It favors the attackers. The attackers have overwhelming superiority against the defenders. And that's about the non-crypto part of things. The firewalls, the intrusion detection system, the trying to make your sandboxes impenetrable, privilege escalation, all those things that the attackers take advantage of. Buffer overflow attacks. We use programming languages that invite buffer overflow attacks and remote code execution. That's how attackers get in. And so, everybody talks about crypto all the time. We're kind of used to just thinking that if we just have good crypto, we're done. But we're not. The Russians broke into the Democratic National Committee and exfiltrated the emails. It would have been great if they'd used PGP to encrypt their emails. Maybe that would have made it more difficult for the Russians, but they would have broken into the laptops for the users and exfiltrated the PGP keys. So we got to do more. I mean, enterprises are terribly vulnerable to this. The Democratic National Committee is a big enterprise. Sony is a big enterprise. Every week we read about another major breach. Even the NSA itself had a breach. Their tools for attacking others those tools were breached. No?
It was the equation group. So it was the NSA's outsourcing party.
Phil, would you pass the mic, please?
Oh, sorry. It was the NSA's outsourced party, the equation group, who got breached. In all fairness, so it's it's like I suppose.
Actually, she should be speaking about this because I'm a crypto guy and she's more.
But can I say, you asked your question to Phil, and I think that's a valid person to ask about cryptography, but when it comes to the enterprise stuff, I think he's spot on about all the other stuff you have to fix first. But if you also look at how enterprises handle, the crypto resources that they have, that's a shambles of misconfiguration. If you, look at how they treat key material, if you look at how they improperly set up their certificates and, you know, still are open for hard, I mean, it's a mess. And we have customers who have a mess. I can tell you that I'm continuously cleaning up our own network. So it's not that we do that well either. So it's such a fragmented space where we have so many other things to clean up before we get to the crypto. And then when we get to the crypto, we don't even do that well. We don't even self-sign well. So it's like, it's asking, I think, a higher level of maturity, which should start at getting the basics right, and then also looking at having some discipline when you do good crypto.
So I actually did this for many years. I spent most of my life running a national standard PKI, a qualified PKI. It's a good question which you ask. Let me give you some very practical ways of the things you can do. One is be realistic. Yeah, if you look at the standards, especially for something like a qualified PKI, they're really tough. They reference ISO standards for protection profiles on Unix systems, which are almost unachievable. And if you achieve them, you won't be running many applications, I'll tell you, because this thing locks down the machine to such an extent, you probably can't use it. So my first advice will be realistic. Do a risk assessment on what you can and what you can't do. My second piece of advice is employ people who know what they're dealing with. That sounds strange, but most of the problems with crypto have got nothing to do with the maths, as Phil said. This is academic stuff, yeah? Most of the problems with crypto are in implementation. So do you know how to configure a hardware security module? Do you know how to split the cards up, etc.? So employ people who know what they're talking about. And then I think the most important thing at all is be reasonable with your procedures. Because you can, certainly with high standard crypto, you can end up with so many procedures and so many rules that you haven't got a hope of following them. And if you're running 24 by 24 operations and you've got hardware security modules which drop their keys when they vibrate, etc., that doesn't work very well. And that's where I think we've seen a lot of problems in the past. I would, of course, completely support what my colleagues say. That is, if your whole solution is not coherent, the cryptography is not going to buy you much, yeah? So I think, and that's what we saw with this big, I forget the name, the big Dutch entity that went down. What we saw was their crypto, did you know, Tar, thank you for reminding me. Their crypto was fine, but their core processes in handling everyday security was not up to scratch, and so they paid the price for that, yeah? So hopefully those three things will help you, but good people, realistic approach, and good processes, and make the processes small, thin, and adaptable. That's what I would say.
Right. You want to add?
Yeah, I can't resist. So you may have seen research I've done that shows the scale of spending on IT security over the years. And it's the driver, of course, is the outside threat actor. And so we had hacktivists, cyber espionage, cyber crime. And then the one that I never had predicted, of course, I should have if I had asked Phil, is the surveillance state, right? So surveillance state is the biggest threat actor because they're the most well-funded and dedicated to breaking all of our systems to get what they need, and that's driven spending. So, you know, the answer, of course, oh yes, encrypt everything. And we can do that. We can get really, really good at encrypting, so we raise the cost for the surveillance state or any attacker. But the attackers are experts at stealing keys. That's what they've been doing for most of their history. They do a little bit of breaking cryptography, but they really are really good at stealing keys. So now we have to invest in everything else in the IT security industry. So it just builds the case for there's going to be more spending. Now, it can be wise spending, it can be the practical kind of spending, because there are organizations that are very, very secure. You know, you look at what they do and you go, okay, that's good enough for the types of assets that they have to protect. And we're talking about major credit card companies, major banks, a few very small government agencies around the world. And they're there, they've done it, and it's just the rest of the world has to catch up. And they're living on what I call a security deficit, right? So they have profited from the digital revolution for more than a decade now without ever paying for it with the security they need to protect it, and they've just been lucky. And so now you're in arrears, and you know, better to spend now because it's going to cost 10 times as much after the breach.
Right, okay. Another question here.
I have a question about post-quantum cryptography. Crypto, which is resistant against quantum computing. There are several proposals for post-quantum crypto. For example, Google released Chrome Canary browser with post-quantum cryptography web browser. And what about security? About such proposals, security, which.
So your question is, what's so secure about?
Yes. But
To be frank, I haven't seen the post-quantum crypto stuff that's in Chrome. When was it released?
yes, in this summer, Google Chrome Canary browser.
Okay.
Yes,
I
for
haven't
testing.
seen the Google Chrome candidate browser. I know Google Chrome, but I haven't seen the specific post-quantum feature, if you will, or
In Canary released are post-quantum cryptography.
okay. I
Yes.
haven't seen that. So to
It's easy to download and test with Google sites. It's work fine.
oh, I believe you, but
Yeah.
I haven't examined it myself. I don't know if you've seen that, Phil.
I don't know what they're using, but I do know that they mix it in with conventional elliptic curve stuff because we have a lot of confidence in elliptic curve products being resistant to today's computers. And so I think that we're going to see, as people start experimenting with the post-quantum stuff, remember I said that nobody wants to use them because they're so unwieldy. Well, even when they come up with the wieldy ones, the more wieldy things, wieldier ones, they're probably going to mix it in with key negotiations that are using the stuff that we already trust. And then we'll gradually, as we gain experience with the new stuff, we can become more dependent on it.
So I love Phil, but I don't always agree with him. So I don't think they're that unwieldy. And if you look at the candidate, A New Hope, for post-quantum algorithms, then you'll see that the key length there is 2048. It's not a million, it's 2048. And the issue is also that if you have a 256-bit key, yes, it's arguable that a quantum computer can reduce it by half, but in terms of polynomial time. But the real issue is it depends on how many qubits you have that are viable. The more qubits you add, the higher the reduction in time that it requires to take to break that key. So it's not that it remains stagnant, that it roughly, takes your time in half, so it's still 10 to the 128 bits. It's not. It actually reduces it significantly. Again, you keep adding qubits, and you have a linear expansion in the amount of cryptanalysis capability you have.
Well,
We're going to just disagree for a while.
yeah. Actually, I don't know as much about post-quantum algorithms as I know about the classic stuff. But I do know that if you have the ultimate quantum computer that everybody's worried about, that the work factor for that, for breaking the AES, is 2 to the 128th time steps. And so you'd have to go after that with a lot of quantum computers, not just one. It would have to be, quantum computers have this kind of inherent parallelism that comes from the qubits, but then there has to be additional parallelism. You have to build a lot of quantum computers.
There are, but it's not just the qubits, it's also the entanglement. So the idea is that you have then multiple states. So you're not just using the singular qubit of being the 0 and the 1 at the same time, which already adds like a quadratic expansion, but you also then have the entanglement factor. So again, that's how you add scale. That plus the total amount of qubits that you've got at your disposal. And then you entangle those qubits, and that's how you build entire systems. So it's actually really dependent on what you've got at your disposal. That's why it's like a sort of Formula One race to see who gets as many qubits where, how. And again, the quantum annealer from D-Wave already has 2,000 qubits. It's just not prepared to perform the functions that you would need. I'm sorry, Phil, I'm making you hold this. But it's not ready to prepare the functions you would need by a universal quantum computer. So the clue is, if we want to actually start breaking algorithms, then we need the universal machine that we know can handle Grovers and Shors. But until we've got that, we've got other applications that we can do with the annealer and with the analog quantum. So.
Okay.
I'm starting next month working at Delft University and when I'm there, I'm going to hang out with the guys working on this, and I'll try to absorb some knowledge.
Don't forget to blog. Okay. Question here.
I have two questions. The first one, from a mathematical point of view, quantum cryptography and quantum computer looks very nice. But it will work only if principles of quantum physics works in reality. My question is to all of you, do you trust quantum physics principles?
Yes, all of our transistors use it. Our GPS receivers use it, our computers use it, and bees probably use it for navigation. Chlorophyll in plants use it. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming. It's quantum physics is a well-established thing. It's been for the past century.
In the case of quantum computer?
Well, I don't know. There's different levels of understanding. I've always assumed that quantum computers are a long way off. Jaya thinks they're almost here. So I'm hoping that I'll learn more about quantum computers, and then I'll start worrying about it a lot more. But quantum physics is an absolutely firm foundation. It's as well established as anything we have in physics.
Okay, go. My second question is, any cryptographic algorithm and protocol requires reliable hardware and reliable software environment. I think that any cryptographic attempt to protect your data is Don Quixote fight. We know that in hardware, there are built-in backdoors. In operating systems, in anywhere. How can we protect ourselves in this situation?
Well, as far as hardware backdoors go, one of the things you have to try to worry about is your supply chain. American military defense contractors are worried about buying their chips from China, And also, if you're building a server farm somewhere, you're going to have servers shipped to you and you install them in your server farm, but what about the supply chain of how they got there? Is it possible that somebody inserted some hardware that doesn't do what it's supposed to do? So controlling your supply chain, having awareness of how these chips are designed. It is possible to get things manufactured in China if you have sufficient oversight over how it's done. Apple gets their iPhones manufactured in China, but I would be kind of surprised if the Chinese government somehow had put in backdoors into the hardware for iPhones.
Okay. Yeah, please.
I think you raised a very good point. My answer is you can't do it. There is no way in my answer you can be sure that the system does not have a backdoor. And that's based on years of experience. The supply chain is certainly a key thing, but look, I come from an environment, when I started my career, I was doing programming for military environments, and we were doing source code analysis line by line. Forget it. It's impossible. It's not scalable, and it's so easy to change code. Yeah? So I think one of the things we have to do, we have to be realistic. Let me give you another example of how this problem relates to daily life to see how bad it is. I said this morning that the car of tomorrow will have over 100 million lines of code in it. And those 100 million lines are scattered across semiconductors, they're in chips, they're in software components. Where is this code coming from? Well, in order to meet market deadlines, this code is being downloaded from shareable sites, and no one is validating it, because you can't. So it's a huge problem. And I think part of the future is going to be risk models that take into account what we can and we cannot do. And if we want to meet market deadlines for new cars, etc., perhaps you can tell me a way of doing it, but I really can't see it. Yeah? So it's going to require a total adaptation of our methods for dealing with risks, vulnerabilities, etc.
Yeah, Jaya wants to elaborate, but look, guys, we can't finish on note that everything is bad, you know?
It's not bad, but...
I'm really happy with what you just said, but I actually wanted to ask you a question during your speech, which I didn't get a chance to do. So if you feel that way about hardware and software and the importance of having it thoroughly fledged out, and why is it then that the NIS directive, which you spoke about, doesn't have any responsibility for hardware and software vendors, puts it on every single sector, but all these sectors are buying from these vendors? That if there is a requirement for a CERT-like function to be there in healthcare, transport, telecom, all the vital critical infrastructure people, but there is no requirement for a product cert at a hardware and software vendor and in the NIS directive. And I don't think that it's fair to say, all right, look, we realize that there might be some problems with hardware software vendors, but we also don't have a way to certify them either. So isn't that also putting the cart before the horse? Shouldn't we first figure out how to certify the hardware software vendors and make them part of the NIS directive, where they have to have a product cert that we can all talk to when we find issues in hardware and software? Because otherwise, you're right, the foundation of that trust, there is none.
So let me just answer very quickly, and I'll give it to my colleague. He hasn't spoken yet. I mean, you know the answer to this. Legislation is a political process that is negotiated by the member states, industry, and the parliament. No one wins exactly what they want to win. Yeah? So what comes out at the end of the day is a huge compromise. And given that you have I don't know if you know how the EU legislative process works. It's a very fair system. It's a very good system. But you know what comes out of the other end, in this case, is the result of 3 years negotiation. Now, having said that, I made the point this morning that legislation is a rather big and brutal instrument. You have to use it very wisely. So I'm not sure which end of the scale even I tip, and I've considered this a lot. Is it better to legislate? Is it better to go through good practices, industry standards, etc.? Because the last thing we want is to force industry to do something which is going to remove them from the market. Yeah, we're dealing with very powerful economic forces here, and it's coming up all over the place. In the mutual recognition agreement on certification, for instance, according to common criteria, we have similar discussions going on. So I do agree with you. I would say be patient. All legislation is a compromise between various groups. In Europe, a lot of people have their say. The industry have theirs. So this is how the situation is at the moment. Maybe tomorrow it will be different.
Lars, you spoke about tomorrow, about the future. Now, does it look that gloomy to you as well?
No, I think if we're going industry vertical or whatever, we're going to create isolated solutions for an industry vertical, maybe something a tad larger, maybe in a nation state, maybe even in the EU. The problem is legislation legislation has failed us in that it hasn't stopped the monopolization of hardware vendors and software vendors, which has been going on for the better part of 3 decades, silently, but to an extent where the market forces have become so extremely powerful that they are willing to throw billions and huge amounts of money at it to, in essence, keep the status quo alive. So I think taking one step back and looking at the bigger picture, if we somehow manage as a global community, which we aspire to be, to influence a very large body to ensure quality or security standards for software and hardware vendors, perhaps that would be an approach. I know it's miles away, I know it's probably not going to happen, it's probably utopia, but it's at least worth throwing that stone in the water and seeing how the ripple effect will essentially start maybe to pick up speed and end up somewhere else. In terms of crypto, I think it's all well and good. I use it myself, and I'm quite good at using software. However, the average John Doe is hardly going to be able to install any piece of working crypto software on their computer because it's much too complex. So I think if that were to be included, thereby we have a bigger pool of encrypted information, thereby we would up the arms race. The adversary would have to spend significantly more money on decrypting everything. Perhaps that will be a game changer. However, there has been no piece of software yet that has been easy enough for an average user to install and utilize.
Yeah, you're so right here. Steve, Peter hasn't spoken yet, so unfortunately we have to finish in 2 minutes, so we still have time to go to lunch.
I'm kind of sitting here in awe of the brain power that's on either side of me, and I'm not sure I've got much to add to a conversation about crypto or EU legislation. I think you raised a point about the vendors, and yes, we've had this conversation as well around should software vendors have legislation binding them to liability and reparative action. I can't answer that, and I certainly won't speak on behalf of IBM for that, other than let me say the one thought that has occurred to me in listening to everyone's presentations today. It kind of felt like watching a Nat Geo wildlife documentary, right? It's this hunter-prey thing. And the thought that flashed through my head was actually, would we be where we are with our defense capabilities if we weren't being preyed upon and attacked? I'm not sure where the balance is. I think it was you who said that we've enjoyed this fat, dumb and happy, the herd mentality has survived because there's a lot of us, and the herd doesn't mind when one falls prey, right? If the other side is gaining the upper hand, something radical has to change, because that would lead to just an unsustainable widespread destruction in industry, and everything starts to fall apart. So that's my 2 cents. I'm not sure if it helps the conversation or just makes me look even less qualified.
You could finish on a lovely note, like is Watson going to be running on quantum computers?
Oh,
who knows?
I tell you what, we've got Martin Borat coming in at 2:30, I think, in this hall to speak about Watson and cybersecurity specifically. The example I used was where a company retrofitted some Watson cognitive elements into existing threat detection, analysis and research and remediation tools. Right, so they sort of not jumped the gun, but they did what we want our clients to do, which is use their skills and their knowledge and their expertise and build in the cognitive elements to help the police, the good guys.
Yeah, the intelligence for the good guys.
Yeah, fight the attacks. Obviously, IBM has decided that cybersecurity is one of the areas that we're investing in. Watson for cybersecurity is not there yet. It's currently in beta.
But I love your cloud-based quantum computer that you've made available for everyone with the 5 qubits for everybody to use.
And I've been at IBM for more decades than I'd care to admit, right? I'm really quite young. But I started in IBM when it was a hardware company. We just made hardware, and we had a very small services organization who installed it. Now, it's a completely different organization. Right? The hardware is this, and everything is about, what I've enjoyed seeing is the shift towards software, IBM embracing open source, IBM embracing community, IBM embracing ecosystem development of solutions. So, it doesn't all come from one place.
Yeah, the machine today, even if it's a business machine, is not the same thing it was in the 70s. Okay, let us thank all the speakers. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your time. It was great to see you all together. We are now all going to have a lunch, and we continue at 2 p.m. sharp. Thank you. Bon appetit.